Hello, everyone. Thank you for coming to my talk, The Dangers of Face Recognition Technology. So I know on the schedule it was said the benefits and dangers of face recognition. But I crossed that out, and I'm going to briefly get into that, like why I decided to cross out the benefits part. But why isn't it? OK, here we go. And so I have to make this disclaimer. All the opinions and views reflected on this talk are my own. They're not of my employer, and I think this is pretty important because I'm going to say some pretty political and bombastic things during this talk. And I wanted to make it clear that this is not something that these are not the views of my employer, especially because I do work for a very large firm, and I'm here on my own behalf and not on the behalf of my employer. So let's talk about face recognition. So I proposed this talk back in May. It is now October, and in the 5 months since, face recognition has been in the news a lot. San Francisco, the city where most of this technology is made, decided to ban this technology. They fine making it, but they're not fine it being used on them. And then 2 other cities have followed suit as well. In addition, the entire state of California has decided to ban face recognition technology by government. And we now have a presidential candidate who is arguing for a ban on face recognition technology by government and law enforcement. In addition, we had a congressional hearing about the impact of face recognition technology. And more importantly, we've had the Hong Kong protests. And when these Hong Kong protests have been happening, we hear stories about how the protesters have to wear face masks, and they have to use laser pointers to avoid the Chinese surveillance system cameras. And they've been cutting down these surveillance towers. And I decided I don't really want to talk about the benefits. Face recognition technology is causing a lot of harm today. And I don't want to say, well, people are being harmed, protesters are being detained, but on the other hand, you might be able to get through airport security slightly faster if you let them scan your face. That didn't seem like a good talk to me. Because deep down, why do we care about all this stuff about AI ethics? Why do we care about fairness? It's because algorithms are causing harm to people today. It has nothing to do with trying to avoid some futuristic Terminator-esque apocalypse. We care about this subject because people are being harmed today. And there have been plenty of books written about these topics. And this is just only a subset, such as weapons of mass destruction, algorithms of oppression, or automating inequality. And there's an entire field dedicated to this. It's called Science, Technology, and Society Studies. It's a subfield of anthropology and history that looks at the way that societal needs lead to development of certain technologies and the impact those technologies have on society. We've been studying this for a while, despite the fact that Silicon Valley thought leaders are like, no one is looking at these problems. No, the humanities have been looking at these problems for a while. And so let's talk a bit about some ways that face recognition is used. So the most common way is surveillance. For example, surveillance in schools. So some schools in Washington State have actually deployed face recognition system technologies on the campus. They monitor the students, they monitor the teachers, they can tell where they are at all times. And the idea is that this would also allow us to prevent suspicious individuals from entering the campus. They cross-reference this with the government database when someone enters the campus and say, like, oh, this is a suspicious person. You should go detain them. And now some people are arguing that this is a violation of children's right to privacy, that children have an inherent right to privacy and free expression, as said by the UN. And there was actually a school in upstate New York, really close to Niagara Falls, that were thinking about rolling out a face recognition technology system like this in their schools. And due to backlash from parents and the communities, they didn't move with this. And as a result, we've actually now have legislation in New York State that would ban the use of face recognition and other biometric systems within public schools, at least until 2022. And more importantly, in the private sector, we're starting to see this idea of startups of how can we use face analytics to make some judgment about your character? Can we scan your face and tell whether you're going to be a high IQ person or a terrorist? And this is an Israeli startup called Faceception. And what they claim is that by scanning your face, they can tell all these things about you. They can tell whether you're a terrorist, and they can tell you're a high IQ. So this makes absolutely no sense at all. There's no reason why your facial appearance should judge whether you are a terrorist or high IQ. There's no connection between your genetic facial structure and what you are as a person, unless you believe in genetic determinism, which is not a thing. And so the issue with this is that this is very egregious, but you see lots of startups like this. You see applications of it. We looked at people's faces, and we tried to predict whether they're a criminal or not. We looked at people's faces, and we tried to predict whether they'd be a good employee or not. We looked at people's faces and decided if they're going to be trustworthy or not. Should we give them, rent out apartments to them? Should we give them homes if we think they're not going to be a trustworthy tenant? And this is a huge issue because we're sort of wrapping this very eugenics-based pseudoscience around techno-mysticism and trying to sell this as some objective truth. We tend to trust automated systems. This is known as automation bias. We believe when a calculator says 2 + 2 = 4, we believe that the answer is 4. And we sort of have the same implicit bias with these automated systems. When they spit out some answer to us, we sort of just trust it intuitively. So now let's talk about some of the limitations of face recognition, face analytics. And so this is Joy Bulamwini. Her story is that she was an electrical engineer, and she was very interested in robotics. And when she was doing tours for grad school, she came across this robot that, when it detects people's faces, it can interact with them. So Joy goes up to this robot, and she lets it scan her face, but it can't detect her face. And it wasn't able to detect her face until she put on this white mask on. And now she's dedicated her life as a grad student at MIT Media Lab to understanding facial recognition technology and how they perpetuate algorithmic biases. Specifically, she worked on this very important project called the Gender Shade Projects. And in this project, she and Timnit Gebru, T-I-M-N-I-T for the captioning people, T-I-M-N-I-T, Timnit's one word. Okay, Timnit Gebru, and so they worked on automating these commercially available facial recognition systems. And so what they did is they built their own custom data set of, based on skin color and then also of gender. And they ran a test of these systems that are commercially available, such as Microsoft, IBM, or Face++. And what they found is that these systems have a higher misidentification rate, the misclassification rate on darker skinned women compared to the other groups. So they were less likely to identify and properly detect darker skinned women compared to lighter skinned males. And I think this is important because when we talk about debiasing algorithms, it's really in the context of like, we debias it with respect to race, or we just debias it with respect to gender. We don't really talk about the intersection of these two groups. We don't talk about the intersection of race and gender. And I think this is one of the first major algorithmic audits that took an intersectional approach and showed that, oh hey, these systems do well by race, they will do well by gender, but the intersection of these two groups, they perform very poorly. And so based on this work, Joy actually started this organization called the Algorithmic Justice League, which is the goal is to sort of educate people about these types of algorithmic biases. Joy is a spoken word poet, and she actually has a very cool video called AI Ain't I Woman, where she shows like how these commercial face recognition systems will constantly misidentify or misgender famous black women such as Michelle Obama or Sojourner Truth. And following the results of the study, so when Joy and Timnit released these studies, IBM releases the dataset, Diversity in Faces, in which they said they have a higher representation of darker skinned faces and more darker skinned women. Now this isn't controversy about this dataset, because it turns out the way IBM compiled this dataset was by scraping images off Flickr. So this is like people's vacation images are now compiled in this dataset without their consent. There was actually an article recently about how Google is trying to get darker skinned people, and some of the methods were like, oh, they hired contractors to go take pictures of homeless people in Atlanta because the homeless people can't actually do anything about it. In addition, there have been multiple federal bills, for example, the Algorithmic Accountability Act. In addition, some of the legislative bans on facial recognition directly reference this Gender Shade project. And now something more close to home, we have this Atlantic Plaza Tower complaint. So if you may have heard the story that in Brooklyn, there's this apartment complex that's trying to install facial recognition locks in the apartment complex. Well, this is the issue because like 80 to 90% of these tenants are elderly black women. And Joy's work shows that, oh hey, these systems are very bad at detecting black women. So this is just a recipe for a disaster. And because of the pushback by these tenants, we're actually now trying to see federal legislation, the No Biometrics Barrier to Housing Act, which would prevent the use of facial recognition technology in public housing. Oh, and I also forgot to mention, in addition, Joy created this safe face pledge. That's what that green symbol is at the bottom. And it says that if you are planning to build face recognition technology, this is sort of a pledge your company can take to say, we want to make sure we don't use it for nefarious needs. We want to use face recognition for good. And there definitely is beneficial needs of face recognition. So for example, helping patients with dementia or Alzheimer be able to deal with losses of identity. And then there's other accessibility issues that can be mediated through face recognition technology. And so they just want to make sure that as you build these technologies, you're thinking about these concerns such as algorithmic bias, but also how do you prevent people from being harmed as you deploy these technologies. Next, let's talk about automatic emotion recognition. And so this is a topic that's very near and dear to my heart, Because when I got started as a behavioral science researcher, I was very interested in how emotions affect human judgment and decision making, which is a very fun topic when you work in tech and you meet people who unironically believe that humanity would be better off if we were like emotionless, cold, calculating, super logic machines, as if this is not the premise of multiple dystopian fictions. And so, most of our understanding of emotions and facial expressions comes from the American psychologist Paul Ekman. So in the late 70s, Paul Ekman traveled around the world and he was studying how people express emotions across different cultures. And what he found is that there are sort of these 6 common or universal emotions that we all have. They are happiness, sadness, fear, anger, surprise, and disgust. And if you've seen the Disney Pixar movie Inside Out, you might recognize the name of some of these emotions. And Paul Ekman also created this idea of microexpressions, that when we react to a stimuli, we sort of involuntarily produce a facial expression that gives some idea of our true emotional state. So combining this work together, Paul Ekman produced the facial encoding system. And what this is a taxonomy for defining emotions based on facial expressions. And how this works is it sort of breaks up the face into these different facial action units, and then you can describe an emotion as sort of the facial actions that occur during that emotion. So you can say things like anger is your lips narrowing and your eyes glaring and your eyebrows furrowing. Or you can say sadness is your eyelids drooping and your lips drooping as well. And so now we have a taxonomy for describing faces. We have a taxonomy for describing the relationship between faces and emotions. So why can't we just teach our computer systems to replicate this? Well, it turns out after a comprehensive review by a group of psychologists from the American Psychological Association who reviewed over 1,000 papers studying the relationship between facial expressions and emotional states, that this is actually not a strong signal. Yeah, facial expressions give some signal of your emotional state, but it's actually a very weak signal of your emotional state. And why is that? Well, one, there's limited reliability. The same emotion can be expressed in very different facial expressions. So take a look at this picture here, these 2 pictures here, and I understand one is a cartoon, but they're both expressing anger. But they're expressing anger in very different facial expressions. And the next part is like sort of lack of specificity, and then also lack of context and lack of generalizability. And so if you see someone crying, you don't really, without context, you don't know why they're crying. Are they crying because they're sad? Are they grieving the loss of a loved one? Or are they crying because they're happy? Did they overcome some strenuous ordeal and they're just overcome with emotion? And when you take just using automatic affect recognition, and you're just looking at a picture of someone crying, you can't distinguish between those 2 scenarios. They look exactly the same. And finally, I want to talk about how computers see gender. And specifically, I want to talk about this idea of automatic gender recognition, of we take a picture of your face and we try to estimate what gender you are. And this implication of these types of systems on trans and gender non-binary individuals. Yeah, this is like a really dumb photo. It's like a taxi cab where if you sit in it, it takes a picture of your face and tries to estimate your gender so it can show you better ads. Because, after all, if you're not trying to improve ad click-through rate, are you really doing data science? And so my interest in this topic actually originated from the fact that I'm trained as a dancer. I'm trained as an aerial dancer. I'm trained in ballet. I'm trained contemporary. And when I ran these images through like Google Cloud Vision, I would often be misgendered. It would often say this is a girl or this is a woman. And I noticed this as a consistent pattern. And I was interested in why this happens. And so I was looking around. I came across this wonderful paper called The Misgendering Machine by Oz Keys. And what Oz did in this paper is they conducted a literature review of these automatic gender recognition systems within the field of human-computer interaction. And what they found is that these systems consistently define gender as this binary variable. It's always male or female, and it's always something that can be defined by physical appearance. And so what Oz argues is that these systems are inherently trans-exclusionary. They inherently exclude trans and gender non-binary individuals because by defining gender as something that can be expressed as through physical appearance, you're inherently excluding these people. And there's no way to reconcile that. And I think this is important because like in computer science and computer programming, we sort of have encoded these biases about gender into a lot of our systems. Our keynote speaker, Tamara Piper, actually gave a talk a couple of years ago at Pi Gotham about her experience as a trans Python developer. And she talks about things like, databases will have names and gender be fixed columns in the database, so you can't change those or update those later. We also have like online forums. When you fill them out, we'll say like, what is your gender? And have radio buttons for male or female and no way to submit other or supply your own gender. And so that's sort of in theory that these systems will exclude against trans and gender non-binary. What happens in practice? So Morgan Schumann, and this is actually a paper that came out like last month. So Morgan Schumann and 2 other researchers at the University of Colorado Boulder decided to do an algorithmic audit, similar to the one Joy did, but more so for gender identity. And what they did is they compiled a data set of 2,400 images from Instagram representing 7 different gender identities. And so they were looking for a gender identity hashtag. So for example, this is an image of someone with the agender hashtag. And they took this image, they ran it through Microsoft's computer vision system, and they ran it through IBM. And both those systems say that this person is a woman. So this person is being misgendered by these systems. And in their audit, what they found is that facial analysis services consistently misgender trans men and trans women at a much higher rate. So the error rate is like 10% to 30% higher error rate compared to cisgender individuals. And this is very problematic because, one, inherently being misgendered is a very traumatic experience for trans individuals, but because these systems occur automatically, they gender you automatically, the trans individuals could be misgendered without them knowing, and this could result in them being outed without their knowledge, and thus jeopardizing their physical safety in many parts of the world. So finally, I want to talk about face recognition technology and governance. So the last 3 sections have sort of been about the limitations about face recognition. These are sort of like technical limitations of these systems. And this is when these tools are dangerous and I'm going to take this quote from Kate Crawford, who is the co-founder of the AI Now Institute at NYU. And she wrote an op-ed in the scientific journal Nature and said, these tools are dangerous when they fail and harmful when they work. And so now I want to talk about when does face recognition work and how it's used. And usually when we talk about this, you talk about it from a face recognition from a privacy perspective. But I want to take a slightly different approach. I want to talk about it from an accountability and power perspective. So some misuses of facial recognition, and I'm using misuse very loosely. So there was this very fun article back in May called Garbage In, Garbage Out. And what it talks about is the different ways like NYPD officers and other police departments use facial recognition. So for example, if they got a witness testimony that says like, oh, the witness seemed to look like celebrity Woody Harrelson. What the police officers did is they went to Google, got a picture of Woody Harrelson, and ran it through this facial identification system. It generated a lead of say, oh, we found a facial match. And they went out and arrested that person or detained that person based on this celebrity photo match. And this report has a bunch of similar examples like that of, oh, they uploaded police sketches to this system and generated leads on that. Or they altered images, they photoshopped images, and then generated leads on that. And so this is a very misuse. Like, this is not how these technologies were meant to be used, but the issue is that there's no really accountability. There's no laws or regulations restricting how the police can use this technology. And a similar story, in China, face recognition is being used to track and detain members of the Uyghur population. I believe I'm pronouncing that correctly. This is a Turkish Muslim minority group in China. And so the Chinese are using this technology to track these individuals, detain them in detain internment camps kind of thing, concentration camps. And there's been reports that they're being harvested for their organs. And the thing is, this is how the technology was meant to be used. China developed this technology for this purpose. And because there's no accountability and oversight, there's nothing stopping them. And that leads to my last point, that algorithms exist in the context of human systems. The tools we build, the systems we develop, are embedded within human social infrastructure. And there's no way you can sort of detangle the policy from the technology. As we build these systems, we must think about how they're going to be used by human systems so that we don't accidentally reinforce oppressive power inequalities. You can de-bias your face recognition systems. You can sort of make your face recognition systems better at detecting women of color or people of color in general. But then if you go sell this technology to ICE, an organization that says really only exists to brutalize communities of color, and I want to reiterate that all opinions are my own and not my employer, that really all you're doing is you've made this technology better so that ICE can do its goal of profiling and tracking minorities better in order to harass them. And part of this issue ties in the fact that a lot of these systems are primarily built by able-bodied white men. AI has a diversity crisis. Tech has a diversity crisis. And this is an issue because if you don't experience all the different facets of social infrastructure, if you don't experience these social institutions in different ways, You won't understand how your algorithms could be misused. You won't understand how they could be abused by negligence or malicious intent. And that's why I think it's important to have diversity as we build these systems. We need to think about who was in the room, because we need to think about, as we try to go towards like techno-utopian solutionism, like all our problems can be solved with technology, we need to take a step back and realize who is defining and deciding what problems we get to solve with technology? Who gets to decide what the solutions are, and who got to decide that the solution should be face recognition technology? Because one important thing I think going forward is that we need to have these conversations of, rather than we're going to build these systems and debias them later, we need to have the conversation beforehand. Should we even be building these types of systems in the first place? And there's this concept of like AI ethics. It's being a pretty controversial topic. I guess controversial, I mean like there have been arguments that, oh, hey, it's really just feel good, not really useful. But I think one useful thing that can come out of AI ethics is it'll give us a framework for technologists to refuse to work on certain technologies. It'll give us a framework to say, we believe this system that when deployed in production will cause harms to different groups of communities or different groups of people, and thus we cannot in good conscience work on these systems. And you're starting to see this now. You're starting to see employees at Google and Google and Microsoft and Amazon organizing walkouts and protests, saying that we don't want to build these technologies because we believe you're working with ICE or working with other government contracts to produce military technology. You're starting to see students, over 2,000 students across 30 college campuses, have signed a pledge saying that they will work for the company Palantir because Palantir is basically building all these surveillance tools for ICE. I think it's very important as we move forward in the future, that we as technologists think about our obligations to society. We think about all the ways that our tools could be misused, mishandled, and we think about threat modeling that at the beginning of the conversation, not as sort of, oh, these harms are happening, how can we do risk management and risk control? And so that's the end of my talk. Here are all the works I referenced and all the papers I referenced throughout the talk, and I really hope you enjoyed my talk.